Movie Timeline's War Journal, entry number 5236. The streets are getting darker. It's looking grim. Movies are not making any sense. Entry to entry, just kind of jumping around. If a lack of continuity is a crime, it's time for some punishment. We're doing the Punisher movies. Before getting to the films, let's talk about the character. Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, first appeared as a villain back in 1974 in an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. He appeared here and there for around a decade as a guest star, but it was his own 1986 miniseries that would launch the killer into superstardom. From here, he'd get his own regular series and then some spin-off series and would show up, well, everywhere. Even with his newfound 80s popularity, it was still a little surprising when he got a movie. In fact, 1989's The Punisher was pretty much the second feature film based on a Marvel property. Outside of the classic serials and made-for-TV movies, you had Howard the Duck appear on the big screen in '86, and then this movie shows up a few years later, going straight to video. We find out that 5 years ago, Frank Castle's family was killed by a mob boss who was acquitted of any crimes, and there's a guy on the streets called the Punisher taking out criminals.
And there you have it.
Hey, that's my line. There's a mysterious man with a knife that has a skull on the end, and he takes out Moretti. Frank Castle is He-Man with his hair dyed black and an oddly spray-painted looking 5 o'clock shadow, and the Iron Eagle is here. I will eventually do the Iron Eagle timeline. I promise. Don't hold your breath, but I do promise. And the Crab is here as a new mafioso in town. And this one is directed by Mark Goldblatt, who had a huge resume as an editor. This guy edited Halloween 2, the first 2 Terminators, Rambo, Commando, Nightbreed, True Lies, Starship Troopers, and of course, Super Mario Bros. But as a director, he had a pretty short career with only 2 movies. This one and the fantastically awesome Dead Heat. You may notice that the Punisher shirt is missing something here since his trademark skull isn't around, but he doesn't mess about, spearing a guy and then ziplining down on that rope. There's a handy computer screen that lets us know that we're set in August of 1988, which means that Frank's been operating since 1983, and there's a gang war brewing with some Yakuza guys with some, questionable tastes in suits, like I'm hoping Frank takes them out for these crimes of fashion. They kidnap the mobster's kids, and the Punisher has this informant that he likes to talk really, really close to, but he gets captured and the Yakuza decide to, I guess, not kill him, but of course torture him, which he then escapes and saves the kids. He misses one though, and it's Franco's kid, so he recruits Frank to help get him back, and yep, still no skull, which was mainly because there was a time that action films sold big and superhero movies did not, and that time was the 80s, and this film was being shot before Batman changed all that, and putting a big sort of costume on their hero was seen as a risk. They take down the Yakuza, killing Tanaka and saving Tommy, but Franco double-crosses him, so he kills him and the war goes on. The film wasn't really a hit and the character went away for over a decade, but then there was a big superhero boom in the late 90s and early 2000s led by the X-Men and Spider-Man films, so it just seemed natural to give Castle another chance, so they did with 2004's The Punisher. This one has Tom I Just Want My Kids Back Jane as Frank, and he's retiring, but his last job saw the death of the son of mob boss Vinnie Barbarino, and it's clear from the resetting that this is a fresh start. Should be kinda obvious, but this has no connection to the previous film. Castle goes to an island with his family, including Chief Brody, who should know to stay away from the water by this point, and Saint finds out who Frank really is. This file tells us that the undercover identity he took on was born in 1972 and drove a 2001 car, so we're at least past that, and Castle gets a Skull t-shirt for a present. Then, in a case of one-upping, instead of just killing the Punisher's wife and kids in a park, they basically wipe out every person at his family reunion and then shoot him up a bunch. He's saved and preps himself for war and finds a new place to stay outside the city. It's inhabited by the Angel and the extremely shy and withdrawn Joan the Mouse, played by Rebecca Romijn. Nice casting there. Here's her comic inspiration. The family's tombstones all tell us that we're taking place in 2003, and he starts getting his revenge by taking down Saint's operations, and he puts on the skull, giving us our first in-costume version of the character. Saint sends assassins out, and one sings a song, which is a kinda questionable tactic. He also fights the Russian in a bit straight from the comic, and then plays Saint's men against each other. Then he gears up with this spray-painted tactical jacket and then just goes in and kills pretty much everybody, and then has a showdown with Saint, but then blows him up amongst cars in the shape of a skull, which is pretty silly. Like, he was trying to be all stealthy earlier, but he took the time to figure out which cars to mine to make this shape that would have been seen by no one. Who was this for? Planes flying by overhead that would not understand what it was that they were seeing? Oh yeah, it's for the fanboys. There you go. His revenge complete, he continues the fight. Surprisingly, the film didn't do all that well, but it did make money, so a sequel went forward with 2008's Punisher Warzone. It was originally just going to be The Punisher 2, but after some issues with the script, Jane declined to return. The opening credits do a bit of date confusion as they show tombstones with Maria, his wife, Frank Jr., his son, but also Lisa Castle, his daughter, a character that's from the comic books but did not exist in the previous film. It also shows their year of death as 2002. It would seem that that's a date error, but considering that he now has a daughter, it looks like this might be a sort of a reboot for the character. It also seems to show that Frank Jr. was only 4 years old, although in the last film he was at least 6 or 7. Oh, and named Will. There's gangster Jimmy McNulty in a weirdly obvious wig doing the wackiest New York accent that I have ever heard.
I don't know. Some kind of biological package. You might like to remember, I'm the top earner around here. I'm not stupid.
But since Jane didn't come back, who'd they get? How about the guy who would become known for being the fat member of the Three Musketeers and the fat member of the Warriors 3? This is a way more violent Punisher than the last film, smashing up Billy in a glass recycler that mangles his face, and Colin Salmon is here, and is this guy in like every genre film from the early 2000s? And come to think of it, so was Darla. Then Frank has a flashback to his family's death, and it's nothing like the other movie, and it's now the way that it happened in the comic books, making it clear that this is not a sequel and is another version of the character. Budiansky says that the Punisher has been at large for 4 years, which tells us that it's now 2006, since we know that the Castles died in 2002. We have Soap here, another of the Ennis-era comic characters, and he says that he's been following the Punisher for the last 5 years, and see that he's 37 years old. But he also says that 6 years ago, he was a family man, but his family was killed. So it seems like it's actually been 6 years since his family was killed, and 5 years since the police figured out who he was? That puts this in 2008, actually? This film has the love him or hate him character of Microchip, and it's Newman. And Frank discovers that he accidentally killed an undercover agent, something that you would have to figure happens a lot with the Punisher. Something that they don't really get into in the books that much. Turns out Billy survived and is now Jigsaw, and he has a brother known as Looney Bin Jim. And I have to tell you, this movie is full of people that are good actors giving terrible performances.
What are you doing here?
Who punishes you?
But it does give us this. Jigsaw makes a deal with the FBI, but then there's a file on Micro and it shows his birth date as January 12th, 1966, and also says that he's 41. So unless this is between January 1st and 11th, that makes this 2007, which is fine. It just means that Soap said 6 years ago that everything was fine. 5 years ago, in 2002, is when everything went wrong. When the Donatellis are kidnapped by Jigsaw, Big Pun goes in and wipes everyone out, including Looney Bin Jim. But Micro is killed. He takes out Jigsaw and is then forgiven by Angela, I guess, because he saved her from a situation that she was only in because of him. So just to sum that up, her husband was working undercover to take down the mob. Frank stormed in and got him killed. He felt bad about this and started to try to make it up to them by going to their house. Other mob guys discovered this and tried to kill them, forcing Frank to save them and kill several people in front of the eyes of her preteen daughter. And she's all like,
He said you were one of the good guys.
Okay, movie. The film was a bomb, only making $10 million, making it officially the lowest grossing theatrical Marvel movie. So, as you can imagine, there weren't any more Punisher films after that. In 2012, though, there was the curious instance of Dirty Laundry, a short film by 3 O'Clock High director Phil Genoux. It starred Thomas Jane and premiered at San Diego Comic-Con. It wasn't publicized as being about the Punisher, keeping it as a reveal, but has Frank trying to do his laundry in a crime-filled area. At first he ignores the group of gangbangers outside, and Hellboy pops in, and eventually they all get punished. In the final few seconds, the skull shirt is revealed, and this isn't really an official entry or anything, but it is a fun little tale. Finally, though, the gunslinger reappeared in an official capacity, but only on the small screen. He appeared as a guest star in the second season of Daredevil for Netflix and was played by Shane Walsh. They'd spin off the character into his own series that ran for 2 seasons, and the character would interact with Daredevil, the Kingpin, Elektra, and on his show would eventually face off against the least Jigsaw possible. His background was fairly true to the comic origins, but they delve into a whole conspiracy thing involving the death of his family, and the show is far less violent than his Warzone portrayal, coming closer to the Tom Jane version. It was canceled after the second season, like all of the Netflix Marvel shows, although it's been teased repeatedly that Frank could join the mainstream MCU following suit of Charlie Cox's Daredevil. Of course, there were other places to find him since he appeared in a number of the cartoons of various Marvel characters over the years, from the Spider-Man series to the X-Men, as well as a few animated films. He's also got a ton of appearances in various video games with his own titles and being a playable character in various multiplayer games. And, of course, you can catch him in any number of comics, although he's going through some unusual changes at the moment, as the skull emblem has been adopted by several extremist groups as well as law enforcement, a situation that the comics creators have been extremely confused by, considering the Punisher's function as someone that works outside the law and is considered an anti-hero. The very creator of the Punisher mentioned that the Punisher was developed as a critique of the justice system and has called on Marvel to take legal action to prevent it, and the company has addressed the issue within the comics and has gone so far as to alter the symbol itself to distance himself from the groups adopting it.
And there you have it.
So there you have it. It's 3 movies and a TV show and some various other things that all feature the character of the Punisher. And yeah, I'm not that big of a fan of really any of these. Now, it's because I'm a pretty diehard fan of the comics character, specifically the Garth Ennis Punisher Max version of the character that I think is kind of the defining version of him. And in the movies, you don't get anything close to that. I want to see a Frank that is similar to like a Jason at a summer camp, except instead of chasing down camp counselors, he's going after mob guys. That's the movie that I want to see, and I don't think that we're going to see that from Marvel. But that's what I want. So give me money to make it. I'll make it. I don't know. If you like the Punisher movies and the comics, whatever, let me know down below. Let me know what your favorite run of Punisher comics is. If you also like NS's version, or if you prefer the more Marvelized version of him in the mainstream comics, do that as well. Of course, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. And if you think about it, go check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines. Sorry, but my voice is kind of going out from having to talk in a deep husky tone. But yeah, check that out. These guys are my patrons. They're pretty cool. And I will see you very shortly, like tomorrow, for another great video. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.